Hey, podcast listeners. Welcome to What You're Reading, the podcast where I connect with fellow book enthusiasts to chat about our latest reads, the topics that fuel our bookish obsession, and all those things that keep us glued to those pages. Really quick, before we get into today's episode, I want to make sure that you know about a brand new subscription box service. I launched Cover Snob over the summer and I'm so excited to give you guys all of the details. Cover Snob is a romance sprayed edge edition box that will be featuring BIPOC authors. With this box, I'm excited to continue to really help promote and champion BIPOC romance authors who are often overlooked by the publishing industry. Check the Cover Snob link in the show notes to head over to the website to view our current selection and subscription options. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, listeners. I am so excited today. You guys around here know I'm excited every day, but I'm so excited today because we get the pleasure and opportunity to talk to a wonderful author that I have recently been introduced to and following on all of the platforms, and really spent some time going down a rabbit hole in terms of the content and what you've got going on. And I'm a huge new supporter and fan. So I'll bring Tony Weaver Jr. on here in just a second, give you a little just teaser in terms of what we're going to be talking about. He's got a new graphic novel coming out called Weirdo. We're going to get into that, the specifics of the book, as well as what it's like for the process of writing a graphic novel, the ideas, the illustration, putting everything together. So we're going to get into all of that here in just a moment. But first, I would love to bring Tony on to say hello to the listeners.
Hello. Tony Weaver Jr. here, fresh out of my writing cave to spend some time with you all today. How's it going?
Yes, thank you so much for taking time out. And really quick, I'm just interested. I know you probably can't say too much, but you're working on something new. Is it the very beginning stages? Or are you in the middle? What is that?
I am brainstorming right now, which is the most frustrating part for me. There are a lot of people that are empowered by possibility, and I'm like, no, I very much prefer structure. Very much prefer if the plot points were kind of already in place and we had our outline set. So this is the most chaotic part of a writing process for me personally.
Ooh, okay. We're going to get into more about that writing process here in a second. So, just really quick for our audience who may not be familiar with you, if you don't mind giving us a little bit more about yourself and your journey to becoming an author.
Well, my name is Tony Weaver Jr., and I wear a lot of hats, both literally and figuratively. A lot of people have seen me wearing this hat in a lot of my TikTok and Instagram videos where I make content specifically around blackness and nerd culture, trying to create a healthy and safe space for nerds of all kinds to kind of pop up and be themselves. I am also a voice actor. I'm an educator and public speaker. So I run a nonprofit organization called Weird Enough Productions, where we create original diverse comic books and partner them with lesson plans and curricula around literacy and mental health for kids. So we serve a little over 2 million students a year across the U.S., helping them improve their self-confidence and self-esteem. And then in addition to all of those things, I'm a writer, but I like to think that the kind of through line in all of the work that I do is how do we use stories to help people become better versions of themselves? How do we leverage the power of storytelling, of the written word, of media in order to help people show up in the world as their best selves? And that's kind of what gets me motivated and what gets me going.
I love that. Show up in the world as your best self. Okay, so a little bit more here on specifically social media. I've seen you refer to yourself as Dr. Seuss without the racism. How
It's true.
how did you come up with that? Where did that come from? Tell us a little more.
So as a writer, I like to flex a little bit. So how do I put it? I don't necessarily feel that I'm arrogant. There's not really an ego in the way that I show up, or at least I don't attempt for there to be. If there is, I talk about it in therapy. Like it'll rear its head every once in a while, but I'm like, I notice that feeling and I bring it up. But in general, I consider myself a vessel for positivity. I'm trying to tell stories. I'm trying to make the world better. And I don't think that it's me doing it. I think I'm just the conduit through which some things happen and I feel grateful for that. But personally, as those things are happening, I do like to add a little flair. So when I started on social media, I saw people making video content that, for me personally, I felt was just really low effort. I felt like it wasn't really contributing much. It wasn't adding a lot to the conversation. It was really like parroting a lot of things. And I told myself, well, fine, I'm gonna do it. Like I'm gonna enter the space because I do feel like there's power in speaking your truth, even if you're not the first one to say it, even if you're not the last one to say it. Just your voice being a part of this larger choir of people saying this thing, there is inherent value in that. But I said, if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna do it a little fancy. So really early on in my social media, I started rhyming in a lot of my stuff just because it was like an interesting challenge for me. Before I wrote anything, I wrote poetry. Poetry was kind of my the first thing that I started writing. I trained for 8 years at the Tupac Shakur Center for the Arts, and Tupac's sister was my first poetry teacher. So I learned poetry really early on as a writer, as a young person. So when I popped up on social media, I was like, how much of a challenge would it be if I said the thing that I wanted to say, but I also rhymed? So the rhyming kind of started happening, and the positivity was also happening, and people were like, "He's like a new generation Dr. Seuss." But Dr. Seuss was racist, low
Yeah.
key. The good doctor was not as innocent as we would lead him to be. So that's kind of my cheeky
Okay.
thing. Dr. Seuss without the racism.
I love it. I love it. Yes, absolutely. Okay. So I like to ask all of my guests just to get a gauge in terms of what they're reading or what they've got going on. And I know you're in a writing process, so I don't know, and we can talk about
Yeah.
that later, if you actually are picking anything up while you're reading. But if you don't mind sharing a little bit about us, about maybe something that you've read recently and loved or didn't quite enjoy, and maybe something that you hope on picking up soon.
So here's what I'll say. Um, I read a graphic novel recently called Tali, Daughter of the Moon. It's by this French artist, and it's very manga esque. And I like it a lot. I'm very intrigued by people kind of taking the concept of manga or their manga inspirations and using it to make something
Mhm.
new. I feel like that's something where a lot of creatives are getting lost. And if you ask me the right question, I'll probably rant about that a little bit later. But Tali is something that I'm reading and that I'm deeply enjoying. I think otherwise, I've picked up a handful of prose things, but I haven't like gotten through it yet. Like I started reading This Is How You Lose the Time War, and I'm supposed to finish it. It's not that it's bad or anything. I just have a lot
Right.
going on. I also started reading To Shape a Dragon's Breath, and I'm supposed to finish that because I'm looking for some like I'm very curious about what fantasy looks like when it's through a non-Eurocentric lens. That's something that I'm reading. But for the most part, I'm consuming a lot of film and TV right now.
Okay. Okay. What are you into?
I'll consume anything if it has a purpose.
Okay.
Like if so when I'm writing or when I'm kind of in the incubating phase for a new project, I just go watch a bunch of stuff in that genre. So I've been watching a bunch of music shows. I've been watching like Daisy Jones and the Six, We Are Lady Parts. I rewatched Scott Pilgrim. There's an anime called Angel Beats that has a music sub focus. And the stuff like Beck and Boys on the Slope. I'm very much in a music show phase right now. I rewatched a little bit of the Get Down,
Okay.
um, all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Do you does that stuff, like, as you're watching or reading or any of that during your writing process, does that hinder or hurt, or does it just depend on what's happening? Like, do you find yourself like, "Oh wait, like I'm pulling that from this story that I just watched or read," or does it just kind of gives you a moment to maybe turn your brain, I don't want to say off, but to a different direction, to give yourself a moment to breathe before you go back to writing?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I have a reverence for the art of storytelling. However, I feel like most stories aren't new, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to make something that's completely new. And I don't necessarily feel like that has to be the case, right? So when writing Weirdo is a middle grade graphic novel. I read a significant amount of middle grade graphic novels while I was in the incubation process for Weirdo. And I think that in reading those novels, I was able to identify some strengths, and I was also able to identify some weaknesses. And that data is what I brought to the table when making this book that I feel really passionate about, specifically focus on improving youth mental health. So for me, I feel like writing a story without figuring out what's in the genre is like hopping in a thread and not reading what everybody said first. It's like hopping in a group chat. It's like, oh, you have 50 unread messages, and then you just say something regardless, completely unaware of the conversation that's been taking place or what everybody's kind of at. It's like it's a little arrogant
Yeah.
to me. I'm like, you're not gonna go check up on what on like the kind of tent poles of the genre, or even your contemporaries and what they're doing. You don't actually have to like any of it, but even if you don't like it, that gives you knowledge to craft towards the things that you do like.
Right. Right. I like that. And I think it's such an interesting take because I read quite a bit of fantasy, so I've seen people in the fantasy genre attack newer authors who are coming up, like, oh, you just made another one of these books. And it's like, well,
Uh-huh.
the heist story isn't original. Like, it's not new, right? This one
Yeah.
author didn't come up with this one trope or plot line, and it's okay to do it differently.
Well, I think like, well, here's what's interesting. I think that stories are stories, and readers in particular, like people that really brand themselves readers, I think there is a certain air of a superiority complex to that pushes a lot of people away from this space. Like, so I'm an author, right? I write books for a living. It's a part of what I do. We'll talk about process a little later. But what I will say is that I think I'm good at writing. It's probably like the only thing I'm good at. I'm like, I consider myself pretty good at it. And I think that I'm able to approach writing with a level of consistency that a lot of writers struggle with.
Mm.
But I didn't read between high school and graduating college because I had this weird chip on my shoulder about the superiority complex of all these book people. Like, Jesus Christ. When I was in college, I very much had this like bury my head in the sand. I'm going to be smart and I'm going to be an intellectual without needing to engage with the canon in the way that you all tell me I need to.
Mm.
I'm very annoyed at some of the concepts that we push out. Like, I think the canon in general is a touchy subject for me. But I spent a significant amount of my time robbing myself of the joy of reading because I felt like I had to stick it to all these purists and people that were very much, oh, well, you haven't read blank, so obviously you don't know
Mm.
anything.
Mm-hmm.
Books are one way to communicate knowledge. That's it. Stories are a way to communicate knowledge and information. That knowledge can be communicated in many other ways. There was a certain point in human history where the written word, print, press, books were essential for human development and growth across generations. And I still feel like that is the case today. I feel like more people should be reading. But I think that as readers, we do a horrible job of inviting people to that table because we do stuff like that. It's like, oh, this story is similar to that story. Yeah, I'm an anime fan. Most shonens can be boiled down to like the same three plot lines.
Mm.
We all have our sensei. We all have our tournament arc. We all have our war arc. Like it's pretty consistent, but people love that. It's like saying I went to the store and I bought a pepperoni pizza, and someone's like, "Well, that's just a pizza with sausage on it." It's like, "Well, yeah, people like pepperoni pizzas. Maybe they'll like sausage pizza. I don't know." And that's okay. Like, it's okay if that's a writer, you just go, "Wow, that pizza looks really good, but it'd be cool if somebody put pineapple and ham on it." And if that's your contribution to the creative canon, like, that's okay. I don't feel like there's beef with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes. I love it. I can tell like you're passionate about that subject. So we'll have to dig into that deeper on another time because I really want to talk about your book here up first
Yeah.
specifically. And just full transparency, I'm not a huge reader of graphic novels. I've read a couple, but it is
That
something that
intrigues
I
me
do
so much.
want to get more into, and I love it. And I have nieces who are coming up, and so especially reading a little bit more on the middle grade scale, because of course, as a doing my due diligence, I love to give them books that I've vetted and read first. And as
Hmm.
soon as I started reading Weirdo, I was like, oh, I can't wait to be able to give this to my little nieces. Like, I really think that they would love it, and they would think it's fun, and that they would see themselves in the pages, especially in some of the illustrations. So before we get into all of that and your process and what came behind it, I'm gonna give you guys, the listeners, just a quick synopsis here of Weirdo and what it's about. So 11-year-old Tony Weaver Jr. loves comic books, anime, and video games, and he idolizes the heroic, larger than life characters he finds there. But his new classmates thinks he's a weirdo. Bullied by peers, Tony struggles with the hurt of not being accepted and tries to conform to other people's expectations. After a traumatic event shakes him to his core, he embarks on a journey of self love that will require him to become a hero of his own story. Weirdo is a triumphant, witty, and comedic story for any kid who's ever felt awkward, left out, or they just don't belong. An adolescent survival guide that will give every reader the confidence to make it to the other side. So, I also read that this is part memoir for your story.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit more about what inspired this story? Which pieces are directly from your life, and why you feel like now is the perfect time to put this out?
So I call Weirdo the nerdy kid's instruction manual for self-love and self-confidence. I would say it is more autobiographical than not. I would say maybe about like 95% of the events in that book are directly lifted from my life. The parts that aren't are things where we shifted the age. So they still happen to me, but I may have been a little older when they happen, whereas in the book they happen while I'm in middle school. And that was partially just for the cohesion of the structure. But there's nothing in that book that took place that didn't happen to me. And it's, to me, a very important book because right now is a very important time to be talking about mental health. I'm very open about the fact that I attempted suicide at a young age, and we have a lot of kids that are struggling with that, especially in the black community. Suicide and depression rates among black kids are the highest that they've been since we started measuring. And for the first time, suicide rates among black girls are outpacing that of black boys in the proportion in which they're growing. So there's a lot of pain that's happening in our community right now. I think young people in general are dealing with things. You see the emails and the corporate statements where people say like, in these unprecedented times, you got to imagine what it feels like to come of age in an unprecedented time, to learn who you are in an unprecedented time, to have your insecurities rear their head in an unprecedented time. Kids are struggling and they need something. So for me, like I said, I consume a lot of things. And when I'm reading, when I'm talking about mental health, I lean a lot into my lived experience. I have some education training. Like I said, I write and develop curricula, and I work with a team of educators. My mom's a public educator. So I kind of grew up in academia. I know how that space works. And when I looked and saw some of the conversations that were happening around mental health, I didn't feel like they were in depth enough. We kind of try to put a band aid over profound confusion and pain that young people are experiencing. We try to put a little bit of a band-aid over it with some random platitudes. So I don't know if you've heard things like this before, but you get bullied, you come home and your parents are like, you got to have thicker skin, you got to be tougher, don't let them see you sweat. You go
Sticks and
tell
stones.
you go tell you go tell a teacher what's going on, and the teacher's like, well, I mean, this is the real world and this is just something you got to be prepared for,
Yeah.
right? And there's nothing that you can really do about it. I think about a black child named Seven Bridges who committed suicide before the age of 12
Mm.
because he was being bullied by his peers because of a medical condition that he had. And nobody pulled him to the side and gave him the tools to parse through all the negative things that he was experiencing.
Mhm.
And stuff like that hurts me deeply. Stuff like that is kind of what incenses me. So when I sat down to write, I said we need tools. We need a path. Weirdo is intended to be a helping hand for every young person on their journey to kind of self love and self actualization. A lot of people would write a book like this, and we'd spend the entire book just looking at all the different ways a kid can get bullied. And then at the end of the book, it's like, but things will always get better. And that's it. And that's the book. Congratulations. Thank you for your $14. But for me, it was really important to say, no, we're going to start at the low point. The book is going to start with him at the lowest that he can possibly go.
Mm.
And we're going to see him deal with that experience and those suicidal ideations. And then we're going to see him come out on the other side. What does getting therapy look like? What does identifying community look like? What does rebuilding your sense of self in a way that is stronger and more resilient look like? I don't think we model that enough in stories, and that was kind of what the important thing for me was when creating Weirdo.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I love the aspect. of talking about mental health in the book, especially for kids. And one of my just sore spots is the belief that, like, was they're just a kid, like it's fine, like they'll be fine, or like the way that adolescents get kind of brushed off is, they're on one end they're strong enough to make it through, they're strong enough to deal with everything that they're facing, but then on the other
Yeah.
end it's like, oh, they're just a kid, like you don't have to take what they're saying as seriously, like they're fine, they're just a kid, they have no idea. And so I really enjoyed seeing the mental health that was represented, and honestly parts of it were a struggle where, the teachers are accusing, him of things, or, oh, you didn't write this, or you didn't do this, or
Yeah.
it's fine, and
That's
like
real.
things
That
like
happened.
and I think that's why I connected with it, because growing up we all deal with that, where a teacher's like, oh, you didn't write this, you're not smart enough to do it, who helped you with your
Yeah.
homework, who did this project for you. And it's like, me, why couldn't I have just been the person to produce? It's like they don't believe that you're smart
Yeah.
enough to do something like that.
In writing in particular, it's a very you tell a kid who wants to be a writer that he didn't make the thing that he made. You accuse a kid that wants to be an author of plagiarism. It's a little bit of a it's a deeper cut,
Mm.
you know. It certainly has like a pain affiliated with it.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. And it definitely came through on the page, and kind of sticking with the point of some of those deeper things. I was curious as I was reading, because it's definitely real. My mom works in social services, and I've worked with, kids and things of different ages. And I just wondered, I've seen some of the pushback in terms of, talking to kids about some of these tougher subjects, which are things that they're absolutely going through. Did you face
Yeah.
any of that when you were pitching this idea, or going through the editing process of, maybe it was a little too tough for kids to deal with, or let's just stick with happy, light, and fluffy?
Well, I think my publisher trusts me.
Mm,
So first second books, I read some books from their kind of slate and their portfolio while I was in the process of kind of putting my proposal together, and I said, they seem like they'll let me tell the story that I want to tell.
mm,
I think at a different publisher, there would certainly be that possibility. And I also think that once the book is on shelves, there are going to be some parents that are like, no, I don't want them thinking about this. I don't want them anywhere near this at all. They kind of want to maintain that bubble. Um, like my mom's an educator. She's at the district level in one of the largest school districts in the state of Georgia. I gave my mom one of my early reader copies, and when she told me she was done, I called her. I said, you feel like there are going to be some schools that don't let the kids read it because of the contents? And my mom was like, yeah, you're going to get some of those, but
mm.
I think the people that need it are going to find it, and that's what's more important. And I lean on that because really Weirdo came at a point of necessity for me because while I was in college and I was volunteering at schools in my community and recognized that kids were dealing with the same issues of depression, anxiety, and suicidal ideation that I was, I said, I got to do something about this. So I was going around the country doing workshops, keynotes, programs. I was on the road like every other week. Sometimes I was doing two cities a week. I was living in DC at the time, and it was me in my 440 square foot studio apartment, just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I was running myself ragged because every time I read a story about a kid who ended their own life because of bullying, that felt like a mark on me. That felt like
Mm.
you're not doing what you're supposed to do. You're not moving fast enough. This is your purpose and you're not operating in it. And I don't say that with ego. Like I don't think I don't have a savior complex. I don't feel like I can air quotes save everybody, but I do feel this intense empathy that drives me to action when I hear about what kids are struggling with. And what Weirdo is supposed to be is a way for me to actualize that and provide that support in a way that transcends anything that my physical being is capable of. Because a book can be in every classroom, in every library, in every backpack, in every locker. When you are in your room alone at night and that darkness falls in on you and your parents are asleep or your parents aren't home and you don't feel like your existence has value and you can't call nobody, it is my hope that that book will be there So I think the subject matter is going to push some people away, but I'm more concerned about the people that it's going to pull in, the people that it's going to be a hand to. And sure, the parents might push it away, but there's going to be a kid that hears about it, that needs it, and they're going to find it independently. Um, and I want it to be there for them.
Right. Right. I agree. And I think that goes in with, right, giving things a chance, because if you just stop even before you get to the halfway point, like, you haven't seen the other side of the
Yep.
story. You haven't seen
Yep.
the journey to, coming through and accepting mental health and understanding and
Yeah.
accepting who you are. And there was even a section in the book where he found his voice and he stood up to the basketball player. And I
Right.
loved it because it was like, this is that triumphant side of the story that I feel like kids need to see. And one of the elements that I really loved was the literature club. And I'm not going to give too much away because I don't want to, get too much into to spoilers, and I want everyone to enjoy and read it themselves. But I loved how, finding, not only was he on the journey to finding himself and healing and accepting his voice, but then he found the community. Then he found
Yeah.
people around him, friends around him that were, I mean, if you think about it, we're all weird, right? Like, and I love
Yeah.
that, like, basketball players are weird. Like, what? You want to go work out
Yeah.
for hours a day and run up and down a court? Like, bro, that's weird. Who wants to do
Yeah.
that? So I think we're all weird in our own way, and I loved watching that story of him find his community, because I really feel like in community we're definitely stronger and we can make it through some of these harder and difficult situations. Was that like your goal there, or again, were you sharing what your experience was helping?
So I think it's both. Um, I had the privilege to find a community that I needed. And I wanted to model in the book that you will only find the community that you need if you're being who you are.
Mm.
It's the only way this works. You kind of got to plant that flag and let it billow in the wind, and it'll attract the people that it's supposed to. Maybe not immediately, but you got to be courageous enough to keep doing that and and keep that flow going. Um, all of the members of the literature club are based on real people, my real friends that I grew up with, and we had a bunch of like kooky, zany adventures. It was a fun time. There's a part of me that just wants that. Like I'm a big anime fan. And in anime, there are a lot of slice of life shows about a group of kids at a junior high school that have some cool uniform that are supposed to be in class but are like off doing God knows what. Just absolutely ridiculous, degenerate shenanigans. You look at Oran High School Host Club, you look at like Nichijou, you look at Princess Jellyfish, and they're not in high school in Princess Jellyfish, but it's still Weird Girls Club just doing weird girl things. I wanted to model stuff like that. And I also I was happy that I was able to do that at a school that was just full of black kids
Mm.
because the black schools don't necessarily in fiction anyway we don't get to do that much. You think black school and you're like, oh, like the Bluford High series, everyone's pregnant, Jamal has a gun.
Yeah.
Um, there, it's like, oh, not that. We're on a whole different tip. There's a whole different thing happening.
Yeah. Okay, so a little bit more curious about like your writing process and pitching this book, and I
Yeah.
know like you've had previous works. So when writing, I'm just curious in terms of why graphic novel versus maybe a more standard traditional air quotes novel format. Did you feel like, because one, that was what you love to consume, or you felt like the
Mhm.
visualization on page is really what brings the story to life?
It's all the above. One thing about me as a writer is that I write to the market. When I make stories, I want those stories to impact as many young people as possible. And you can look at market trends to determine what audiences want right now. And I don't particularly think there's anything wrong with saying, I'm writing something because there's an impact that I want to have on an audience. How do I meet that audience where they are? And for kids right now, middle grade graphic novels are performing particularly well. They're great. They're engaging in general, but especially for reluctant readers. So kids that don't necessarily identify as readers and kids don't consider themselves as like those dense intellectuals that get assigned the advanced reading stuff. They
Mm.
deserve to have fun and to have books where they can see themselves. And remember the conversation that we had earlier about my whole like my blood feud with with kind of superiority complex literature people. So it felt good to go, I'm going to write this story that's going to be really intuitive, that's going to have all of this amazing intellectual depth, but we're going to make it a graphic novel because it's what I like, because it's what the market likes right now, and also because it allows me to create that representation in a way that people can actually see. I think with the representation with a graphic novel, there's something really powerful, because when you are creating something that people have not seen before in a graphic novel, you literally get to create that thing. You
Mm-hmm.
get to show them that thing. You get to model that thing. And that's not just for the kids in Atlanta where I grew up that are going to be like, yeah, this is actually true. This is real. This happened. Like in Weirdo, there's a chapter where we begin in a plant store, and then in the back of the plant store they're just selling trading cards for some reason, and somebody in Atlanta is going to be like, oh no, that's real, that's at North DeKalb Mall, there is a plant store that's trapping Yu-Gi-Oh cards out the back of the store. Like that's actually a real thing. So one person's going to see that and be like, wow, I relate. But for a kid like in rural Nebraska that's seen like two black people in person before, they're gonna open this book and they're gonna see more black people in the book than they've probably seen in real life.
Right.
And they're gonna see a variety of behaviors, a variety of personalities, a variety of hair textures. And I like to think that that's gonna do something positive. Because like they're gonna empathize with a person that they have not, with the type of person that they have not yet ran into. And I think that that's important.
Yeah. And then a little bit more about your writing process. Like, is
Yeah.
there a process? Is it just kind of like it comes to you when it comes to you? Do you have a
Yeah.
method or anything that you follow? Is it taking a long time, or it takes as long as it takes? How does all of that kind of come together?
So I'm gonna tell you something, and I promise I don't have an ego. I only talk about writing in this way because it's like the only thing I'm good at, right? Like I gotta lean into my strengths. What I want you to know is that I'm built different.
Okay.
They are writers. They are good writers. I'm built different. That's how I feel about myself. Because for me, when I write, it's like flipping on a switch. I think like very early in my creative career, I read this book called The War for Art by Stephen Pressfield. And in that book, Stephen Pressfield characterizes this concept of going pro, where he basically says the difference between somebody that does this as a hobby and someone that does this as a professional is that you know how to turn it on and off.
Mm.
If you were moving boxes at an Amazon warehouse, you could, and you showed up to work and you were like, "Boss, I'm just not feeling it today. The muse hasn't really hit me. I can't move boxes today." And the boss was like, "Well, when are you going to be able to do it again?" And you were like, "I don't know. Like it'll come to me. I might need to go focus on something else for a few months and it'll come back." You get fired.
Right.
Like in literally any other job, you would get fired. And sometimes writers get so deep in their heads that they're like, wow, I can't write, I can't create. And everybody's process is different. Some people like leave the game for 2 years and then come back and pen an absolute banger.
Mm.
So I'm not saying that my process is like the objectively correct process, but for me, I take pride in the fact that when I say it's time for me to write, it's time to write.
Mm.
So I'll spend 2 to 6 months outlining something. I'll get that outline like really strong. I'll spend 2 to 6 months outline. I'm consuming. I'm taking plot points. I'm trying to understand for myself, what is this story? What am I saying? Who are these characters? And then the moment that outline is done, I go lock myself in a room for like 3 weeks, and then the book is done. I wrote Weirdo in 20 days. I outlined it. As soon as that outline was done, I went home for Thanksgiving, and then I told my parents I'm staying through Christmas, but I'm not here. Don't bother me. And I went up to my room, and in 20 days, the book was done. And
Wow.
then for Weirdo 2, very similar. 20 days, book was done. I have another series that was acquired called The Dream Frontier. And The Dream Frontier, I got tripped up because my outline wasn't as strong as it needed to be. I think our page limit for the Dream Frontier was like 280 pages,
Mm.
and my outline was definitely for a 400-page book.
Wow.
So I showed up ready to write, but my weakness as a writer, where I'm always trying to improve, is gauging how much like converting the outline into page count in graphic novel format is something that I'm constantly trying to improve at. So for the Dream Frontier, I had to go and rewrite the book as I was writing the book. I had to cut out characters, I had to cut out arcs, moments, settings. Like, well, if that setting isn't there, then that means they can't join up here later, which means that this part doesn't make sense, which means I have to clean this and I got to make this. And after you do all those cuts, you're like, well, is the story still what I want it to be? Have I said what I need to say? And in the case of the Dream Frontier for the first book, the answer was no. So I had to go and rework a bunch of things and like rework some characters' arcs. So the Dream Frontier actually challenged me a lot. It took me like 4 months of continuous writing to make the Dream Frontier. And I felt really embarrassed by that. I was like, this is horrible. 4 months? It never takes me 4 months to finish a book. That's ridiculous. And it wasn't like I would have to write for like 3 weeks and then go do a month of travel because I had business obligations and then come back and spend like 2 weeks on it. And the starting and stopping was very jarring for me. And I didn't like that. I was like, when I start, I want to get done. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. So, I'm curious. Like, you've taken all of these characters out and these sections out. Like, do they live somewhere where you're like, I want to bring them back somewhere, bring that back somewhere, or are they just like, sorry, dude, like, sorry, y'all, I gotta.
Sometimes they get put to book two.
Okay.
Sometimes it just doesn't work. But if a concept is really cool, I just put it to the side and be like, I'll use you later.
Okay.
You'll appear. You just won't be here.
Okay. Okay.
And there are a lot of things in the back of my head like that where it's like, oh, a character inspired by this might be cool, or a power system like this might be cool, or a location like this might be cool. I don't know what you're for, but I'll find you eventually. And that's honest, that's how a lot of my writing comes to be. I listen to music a lot, and sometimes I'll hear a song, and the song will tell me what I need. Like the Dream Frontier, for example. Go read Weirdo. Weirdo is extremely important. Focus on Weirdo. Weirdo is my debut graphic novel. Focus on Weirdo. But after I finished Weirdo, I immediately started working on Weirdo 2, and I wasn't quite clear on what I wanted to do for it. And I had the idea for the Dream Frontier kind of sitting in the back of my head, and the Dream Frontier wasn't quite right. But I heard this song about this black woman composer. I heard like a 90-second snippet of the song, and the song, the composition that she put together sounded like I believe it was called like Chrysalis Extended, I think is what it was called. And the song sounded like Kingdom Hearts video game music mixed with like Harlem Renaissance jazz. And I heard that, and literally as I heard the music, it was like the story sprung up in my head. And I was like, I need this out of my head now. Like I went and sat in my office and with one of my notebooks, and I like put this 90-second snippet on repeat for like 6 hours. And it was like that scene in SpongeBob where he's doing the paper and he's like, and some of these, and some of these. I like did all that, and I had like most of my outline, and I had it, and I was like, my publisher doesn't even know that I'm writing this. They're waiting for Weirdo 2, and they're not. My agent's not going to let me pitch it anywhere until Weirdo 2 is done. But I really wanted to write the Dream Frontier, so in 3 weeks I wrote Weirdo 2 to get to the story on the other side. I was like, I like this. I like Weirdo a lot. Weirdo 2 is going to be really cool, but I literally went and faced down that boss because I was like, I'm trying to get to the story that's on the other side of you. And when I find that piece of music or that thing activates me or like that ignition happens, I gotta write. I gotta get to the thing, which is why I end up staying awake until 6 or 7 in the morning.
Oh my goodness. Wow. Yeah. Wow. How, okay, wait, this has nothing, well, I guess it does have something to do with writing, but so are you writing in a physical notebook or you're not typing it out? You're like, physical notebook, let's go, and you write it all down and
Um,
then
I
you transcribe
outline
it?
I outline in my notebooks
Okay.
and I problem solve in my notebooks.
Okay.
So very often I'll like monologue writing in my notebook. So for example, in Weirdo, the moment in the book where I kind of brush upon my suicide attempt, where that happens, there was a lot of balance that needed to happen. We needed to communicate the gravity of the subject, but we also needed to do it in a way that wasn't going to awaken any traumas or encourage any copycat actions. And I mean, and if you got into that part, you see, like, I think we handle it pretty, like,
I think it's
poetically. I
done
think we
very
handle it.
well.
I
It's,
think we handle it pretty well.
yes.
And in figuring that out, I sat down at the notebook and I wrote. I was like, well, here's the problem. I'm writing all this. I'm like, here's the problem I'm having. I want to communicate this emotion and this feeling. However, the physical kind of limitations of a book are going to make me do this. Personally, I'm struggling because I don't want any kid to read this part and get any ideas.
Hmm.
Here is How do I communicate that? Well, what I could try is this, or what I could try is this, or what I could do is this. And I'm writing all of this, like pages and pages of me basically playing ping pong with myself. It's like, you could try this. Well, if I do that, then this will happen. Oh, well, if I do that, then this will happen. And that's kind of my process.
Okay, good. So I do have a couple of final questions before like we get into like a little bit of a lightning round, and then we'll let
Yeah.
everyone know when your book is coming out and where they can find you. So I asked my audience again specifically for the graphic novel, like if they had any questions and what they wanted me to ask you. So a couple of most of them really were fascinated by like how the illustration piece, how those two things come together. Are you sketching it out and do you already kind of see it in your head and you hand it over to the illustrator? Are you writing the entire thing and then handing it over? Like, how does that
Mhm.
process happen?
So I mean, everything works a little differently. Prior to Weirdo, I wrote a graphic novel called The Uncommons, and for The Uncommons, I built a team of artists in house that kind of worked for my company full time. So in The Uncommons, we're deeply involved. I'm writing scripts, I'm putting descriptions, and then they're kind of come to me with sketches, and we're kind of figuring it out. There are some places like people that write for Marvel. I've been told. Uh, that at Marvel, sometimes you write a script, you submit it, and then you just don't see it again until final art is done. Like you literally don't have any, like you don't have any control.
Oh my
That's
God.
not how I like to work.
Yeah,
I
that's
like to see each part of the process. And the illustrators that I work with, Jessica and Jacinta, are particularly good at like their draftsmanship, the way that they lay out panels. So when we were thumbnailing, literally every page and every chapter, they would send me the page, or I go look. I watch kind of as they came in, and we work on things in real time. Sometimes I had a really clear idea of what panels were supposed to look like and where they were supposed to go, and sometimes I did not know. I just knew, hey, all of this needs to fit on the page. So I think that their strength as draftsmen
mm,
is kind of what contributed a lot to how beautiful this book is, and how clear it is to read through, kind of the visual language. I think that was a muscle that I was still developing at the time. And for Weirdo 2 and for the Dream Frontier, it's like I feel a lot stronger in it. But I think a lot of that was kind of learning from them, and following their lead. They were very strong team members to have.
mhm. Absolutely, absolutely. And I love the I'm fascinated and love the illustrations on page and some of the things that are going on in the background, right? So it's not just like, the characters and what's happening, but you're seeing like I think there was like someone's phone was going off, and so there are like little like light copies that
Yeah,
say ping in the background, and it's
yeah.
so engaging and inviting, and it's not just reading the bubbles and flipping over, but you're literally visualizing and going on this experience, which makes the whole thing just that much more of an in-depth. I feel like I'm here with the characters at the school with them.
The whole team on Weirdo were rock stars. Like Jessica and Jacinta did really well. I think our letterer did really well and went above and beyond on a lot of the SFX, in the visuals. There are some SFX where it's not just the word. There's like a little doodle, or like if there's a whoosh, there's like a breeze to go. And I'm like, letterers are not obligated to do that. Like he he really wanted this thing to hit. And I also wove in a bunch of Easter eggs of like stuff to put in the background. One of the things that the twins set up really early on that I thought was like very character appropriate is that if you read the book, there's a character named Cornelius, and Cornelius never actually sits in a chair. If you look at the book, every time we're
Mm.
supposed to be in a chair and we're supposed to be sitting, Cornelius is in the chair, but he's never like sitting in the chair. I encourage you to go back
I'm gonna
and
have to
look.
go
From
back
the
and yeah.
moment Cornelius pops up, he never sits in the chair. Like even if it's a serious moment, he's like on the arm of the chair, or he's like laying in the chair, or his like feet are up in the chair. He's never like sitting in the chair like a normal person. And it's those like tiny things that I really like.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm definitely gonna have to go back on my iPad and flip through to see to see all of those moments. And then like when it comes to You kind of touched on this in terms of collaborating with the illustrator. Do you get to any say in who the illustrator is? The publisher just kind of gives you your pick, or like what is that? Because like now clearly you have a great relationship, it seems, with the collaborators on Weirdo. Can you keep them and you guys just continue to work together? Because I feel like the longer you work with someone, right, the more you kind of have that shared understanding, and some of those non-verbals where they just understand what you mean can be so impactful for future work.
I mean, every project is different, every publisher is different, and their relationship with every author is different. At first second, they trust me enough as a storyteller, which I think is like how do I put it? I'm deeply grateful to them for trusting me because I wrote the Uncommons, but as far as the publishing world is concerned, Weirdo is my debut graphic novel.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote Weirdo during the winter of 2019.
Mm.
So really, the world is about to catch up to what I was writing 5 years ago.
Right.
And 5 years ago, first second looked at what I was doing when we sent out the proposal for Weirdo. I had some publishers that were like, "We're interested, but I don't understand this part of the outline. Can you update the outline and then come back to me and stuff like that?" And first second looked at the outline, looked at the proposal, and had a conversation with me. It was like, "Actually, no, I trust him. I think he's got it. He's got the juice. Whatever he wants, let him have it. I feel like the book is gonna hit." And having a publisher that trusts me in that way means that they give me a lot of leeway and creative freedom. So I can talk to I did get to pick the artists that I wanted to work with, and not everyone does, but they did kind of give me that level of autonomy in order to create kind of specifically what I wanted, and I'm grateful to them for that. I feel like it panned out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's fantastic. And then so the last little bit question here is for those of us without kids. Like I said, absolutely, my nieces. As soon as I can purchase a copy, it's being sent, one for each of them. They don't have to share. But for those of us without kids, how else can we support you and engage in your message and your story and everything that you have going on, so that we can make sure that we're supporting you on your journey, but also all of those that are interconnected with you as well?
Well, I would say that Weirdo is for the weird kid in everybody.
Mm.
It's a middle grade graphic novel, but it's a journey to self love and self actualization. And I think that that's a journey that all of us have to take. So, where the book is going to hit you is going to be when it gets to wherever you are on your journey. I think some people that are adults are going to read it and they're going to go, "I wish I had this when I was younger. What can I learn from it now?" When you think about like adults in general and the content that they consume, there's this meme in the literature community about how YA isn't really for young adults. Like why YA is not for young adults. I think of some of my favorite shows like Dairy Girls. Like those girls are in high school. Those are high school girls. I'm a grown man, and I think this show is absolutely
It is
hilarious.
great.
Um, and in anime, it happens very often. Like in anime, you get people in their mid 30s that are like, "Oh, I love this show," and it's like, "What's the show?" And you pop up at the show, and it's like, "Here's a story of how I became class president of Kunokigawa Junior High," and it's like, okay, so you've demonstrated the ability to connect with characters that are in a certain age group, even though you might not necessarily be the target audience for it. So I'm like, Weirdo is a book for everybody. There's something for everybody to get from it. But if you're one of those people where you're kind of like, actually no, I prefer myself to be gritty, dark, berserk, Game of Thrones. I appreciate what you're doing, Mr. Weaver. However, I'm afraid your fluffy mental health stories is far below the traumatic sensibilities I prefer to consume in my content. That's fine. You can find me on social media at Tony Weaver Jr. I'm always talking about nerd culture. I'm always talking about self love. I think the Dream Frontier is going to hit the YA people a little harder, and that'll be cool. So kind of be on the lookout for that. But I think Weirdo is really important. Championing a book like this is really important, not just for the mental health conversations, but also for what it means for publishing in general. There aren't a lot of black men in publishing,
Mm-hmm.
and the black men that are in publishing have all been like kind of kind enough to take me under their wing, like getting Jerry Kraft, Jason Reynolds to kind of pat me on my shoulder and say, "I got you. I'm here for you. What do you need?" Is basically like being in the world of Dragon Ball Z and like Goku and Vegeta themselves showing up and saying, "Hey, what do you need?" They really rolled out the red carpet for me, and I think that all of my opportunities onwards, the stories that I get to tell as a writer, are hinging on how this story shows up in the marketplace. So I'm pushing for a lot of people to support me in that way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I will say I had some tears towards the end. I was so happy for the characters. I was so happy for the friend group and the families and just all of it, to where it was that emotion. I haven't seen Inside Out 2, but I've heard like adults talk about like how they're crying in Inside Out 2, and I feel like those types of moments can also happen in these types of stories, and I just love it. And I will absolutely be encouraging everyone, all listeners, by the time you guys are listening, don't believe it'll be available for purchase just yet, but put it on those TBR carts because
Yeah. Those
yeah, or
pre-orders are
pre-order.
important. Pre-orders are super, super important. Pre-orders determine how much of the book gets stocked physically in a store. So
Mm,
if a book if a book gets below a certain threshold of pre-orders, then that's the difference between we'll have one or two copies in our few predominantly black regions, or we're going to have five copies in every store. I think Weirdo is a book that people really need, but there are a lot of potential pitfalls for Weirdo. Like there are a lot of ways for this story to get lost. So if people see it and they go, "Oh, there's a black kid on the cover that goes to school with other black kids. This is a black kid book." We lost,
mm,
because mental health is a universal message for every kid that every family can benefit from. If people kind of hear about the mental health angle and they're like, "Oh, well, this is a little too heavy," we lost, because
mm.
mental health doesn't have to be heavy, and there are ways to have that conversation that are rooted in joy, and that's kind of what the book is intended to do. But if we don't get enough pre-orders for physical stores to stock the book in earnest, that means that the kid that really needs it, who's not in my network, that's not in your network, that doesn't have a teacher that cares about them or a librarian that they can go talk to get recommendations from, the kid that deeply needs this is not going to find it, because the opportunity to bump into it organically is going to be significantly limited. So pre-orders are like really game changing for the general like lifespan and impact of this book, because I firmly believe we get enough pre-orders, that book is on shelves when kids walk in and see it, and when booksellers see it, it is immediately going to light a spark. A community will get built around it, a movement will get built around it, people will start talking about it, and that snowball effect takes place. But if we don't get that initial kick, then it's very easy for books to kind of fall by the wayside.
Right, right, absolutely. All right, guys, you heard. Go click the links. They're all going to be in the show notes to please pre-order this book, and let's rally around and support. This is something that I deeply believe. I wish I would have had growing up. So absolutely, absolutely. Is there anything else? I know we're up on time. So is there anything else that you want to leave with the listeners? And if you could please make sure everyone knows where they can find you online.
I am at Tony Weaver Jr. on all platforms, and check out Weirdo. I think it's a pretty fun time. I'm biased, but I do think it's pretty good.
Yes, yes, yes. I co-sign. I co-sign. Thank you so much, Tony, for taking time out to talk with us today, and just hang out and let me pick your brain in terms of the writing process and where you got the inspiration about this novel and just all of it. And I really appreciate it. So thank you so much, and wishing you the best success. And I can't wait to help support and push Weirdo out to the masses.
Thank you so much. What I'll say is, especially for our book talk people, our bookstagram people, making content supporting black authors, highlighting stories by black authors is deeply important, because very often when we have these book talk trends or lists, black authors are not always included. So I'm grateful for your support.
Yes, yes. Okay, guys. Well, we'll talk to you soon. And until next time, bye.
See ya.
Hey there, one last thing before you leave. Are you looking for a group to read and chat about books with? I'd love to have you join us on our current buddy read of Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. Our virtual discussion will be on Sunday, September 8th. All details, including the link to join and our monthly book thread, can be found in the Geneva app, which you can access by clicking the link in the show notes. Quick reminder that all books mentioned in this episode are also linked in the show notes. Thanks so much for joining us today and wishing you a wonderful reading adventure until we meet again. Chat soon.